What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Anti-Prophet, and today we are going to be talking about the rise of anti-Semitism in the West and whether or not it is considered anti-Semitism or if it is simply a legitimate criticism of Israel. And the thing that brought this to mind for today's episode is a clip that really blew up over the weekend of a guy by the name of Bob Vylan, I think that's how you say his name. He was doing a show in Glastonbury and ended up doing a chant that many people found to be extremely offensive. So let's start off by taking a look at this clip, and then we will do some discussion from there. Take a look.
Free, 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 free. Alright, but have you heard this one though? Death, death to the IDF. 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 Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be, inshallah, it will be free, free.
All right, so obviously this is a little bit dicey, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, to see this and be like, okay, well, yeah, that might tread into the domain of being anti-Semitic. However, the thing that I think a lot of Westerners don't really understand is the fact that this type of treatment towards Israelis is actually very normal if you know where to look. Because what we're dealing with when it comes to Israel or the Jews in general is we're dealing with a group of people who are ultimately high achievers in society who are too diffuse in how they are situated throughout society to really band together, except for in Israel. And as a result, they get bullied because nobody really likes high achievers who end up outpacing them, especially when it happens inside of their own society. You know, we've all heard the conspiracy theories, how the Jews run the banks, how they really run Hollywood, how there's some big psyop happening in America in order for the Jews to make the white man hate himself. Like these are all pretty well-known conspiracy theories at this point. However, you have to understand that this isn't just specific to Jews. This happens inside of the Asian world as well. Because if you take a look at how the Chinese, for example, are treated throughout the rest of Asia outside of China, you see that there is a group that are really, really hardworking and really do very well economically in the areas that they set up shop, and that creates resentment in the communities around them for the purpose of racial tensions, but I think more basically, just based on the fact that here comes an outsider into my community, they're doing better than me, what the hell is going on? It's a question of haves and have-nots, right? A place where this happens a lot is in Indonesia. There are Chinese people based in Indonesia who are called Chindos. And many of these communities are looked down upon, even though they are better off economically than the majority of people in Indonesia. And as a result, you know, these successful people are bullied. So when it comes to all of this, what we're seeing happening with Israel is not specific to Israel. I know a lot of commentators in the center right like to say that. Why are people specifically angry at Israel? Why is anti-Semitism something that is so prevalent throughout society? And I think it really has less to do with ancient blood feuds or any sort of real negative action on the side of Jewish people, and more to do with the fact that people don't like it when a minority of the population does better than them inside of their own country. It's really no more complicated than that. However, the next question that we have to ask ourselves when we are dealing with a clip like the one we just saw is whether or not chanting death, death to the IDF is a valid political position to take. And this asks ultimately a deeper question, not even in relation to the IDF, but in any conflict whatsoever. And that question is whether or not violence is ever justified, whether or not genocide is justified ever. Because when you take a look at history, the fact of the matter is that war and violence have moved history forward more than peace ever has. As human beings, we love conflict. And when we don't get our way, we go out of our way to dominate the people who aren't giving us what it is that we want through violence in order to basically win the argument. That's something that happens since the beginning of time. And the question is, if violence is something that you cannot take out of society, then what exactly is worth fighting for, and what exactly is worth dying for and killing for? Because when we talk about this, there are several things that could theoretically worth be dying and killing for, right? The first are ideas. The second is your personal preservation of health. The third is the preservation of safety for the people around you. We'll just keep it to those three to begin with. So let's start with ideas. When you ask the question, are ideas worth dying and killing for? Most young men are very, very quick to say, yes, ideas are worth dying for. And a lot of people, especially in America, are very quick to say, I would die for my country. That to me is someone being willing to put their life on the line for an ideal. However, the question that you have to ask yourself in follow-up is whether or not ideas are worth subjecting your family to a painful death over. Is it worth watching your family get tortured in order to defend an idea? That makes the question much more complicated, right? And I think a lot of these young men who like to pretend that they have a really, really strong disposition for revolutionary action don't really fully think through what violent overthrows or what violent revolutions actually do to people in society, specifically what it would do to the people around them. However, bringing this back to the Israel-Palestine issue, it seems like if you were to take a look at Israel's actions and Hamas's actions, it seems like Hamas seems to think that subjecting your family members and your neighbors to a painful death is totally acceptable in the pursuit of an idea. Now, for me and my priorities, if I ask myself this question, right, I think my level of priorities are the people I love, then from there, ideas, and then from there, my life. I do think for the right idea, I would die for the idea. I would not subject the people I love to die for that idea on my behalf. And again, getting back to Hamas, it seems as though that their value ladder is ideas up here at the top, then their own lives right here, and then the lives of the people they love down here at the bottom. Now, for me and my mental framework of morality, I think this is extraordinarily cowardly. And you might hear that and think to yourself, oh, Anti-Prophet, this is a totally straw man argument. This is not how Hamas treats the people around them. They just really care about their struggle against the evil apartheid state of Israel. Sure, could be. But then why is it that Hamas never takes the citizens of Gaza and hides them in the miles and miles and miles of underground tunnels and bomb shelters when the IDF is bombing Gaza? If they did, that would be an indication to me that Hamas cared very deeply about the people around them, about the people that they loved. It would be an even greater indication to me if Hamas did not embed themselves inside of civilian populations, specifically for the purpose of provoking the IDF to bomb those locations in order to garner international support. And I think when you compare that value ladder of Hamas to the value ladder of Israel, and when I compare that to my own value ladder, Israel's motivations line up with mine more so than Hamas's. Because again, I think Israel cares more about defending the people they love and then the ideal of what Israel represents, and then their own lives are at the bottom of that value ladder. Now, you could hear all of that, and you could think to yourself, okay, well, this is just an indication that Anti-Prophet and the West and Israel, based on the fact that they all probably share this same value ladder of having ideas being second to the people that they love, it just means that Hamas is more based than the West or Israel. But let's look at the idea pushing Hamas in this direction, the thing that they want to actually fight for and are willing to sacrifice the lives of the people around them in order to defend. And that idea is Islam, right? And the question here is whether or not we in the West view Islam as something that will take us into the 22nd century, the 23rd century, the 30th century in a way that embraces tech, in a way that creates a positivist future for humanity? In short, is Islam in support of a progressive society? The answer to that is obviously no. Like, Islam has no interest whatsoever in real modernization. Now, I know you could probably go back and forth with that between really hardcore fundamentalist versions of Islam versus more moderate versions of Islam, like you would see in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia. You could go back and forth with that. However, I think that even deeper point there has to do more with any Judeo-Christian religion than it does with Islam by itself. Because ultimately, if all of these religions ultimately believe in the inherent good of the world ending, of the apocalypse happening, in God coming back and killing all of the evil people in the world so that the good people can go to heaven, in my mind, that's a bit of a death cult. That's not something that takes us into the 22nd century in the way that I think would be best set up to see us succeed. And as a result, you're dealing with the religion of Christianity, the religion of Islam, the religion of Judaism. All of these Judeo-Christian religions are essentially death cults. So getting back to Hamas, Hamas is not the moderate version of Islam. You can't even slap that defense on it. It is one of the most radical possible interpretations. Is that an idea that we in the West can look at and view as admirable when it comes to the defense of that idea? And if the answer is no, then why do we support Hamas at all? And the very last thing that I'll say here, I understand that you could almost make that same argument over in the direction of Israel, right? If we are putting Judeo-Christian religions all together in the same basket as essentially death cults, then why should we be defending what it is that Israel is doing if it is ultimately a Jewish-focused, religious, nationalist society, right? But if we operate in reality, where conflicts like this are ultimately zero-sum games, where there will be a winner and there will be a loser, the question is which side of the conflict defends Western values more than the other? Which side of the conflict defends the value ladder, the value structure that I laid out earlier, where the life of the people around us is more important than the idea, and the idea is more important than our own lives? I think the answer to that is pretty clear. However, I want to hear your answer. Let me know below in the comments, because ultimately everything that we talk about here on this channel is complicated. It requires nuance. And most importantly, it requires that you think for yourself. If you want to learn how to think for yourself and how to make sure that you are protected from algorithmic manipulation and propaganda, then go to the link in the description of this video and I will show you how to become digitally sober. Or if you want to do a little bit more exploration around the legitimacy of state violence, then click on this video right here.